So I will talk about neurobiology of compassion. I changed the title slightly. I sort of omitted the neurobiology of compassion, since I realized that there is, even though it's a lot that we know about compassion and how sort of compassion is related to our neurobiological selves, there is also still a lot that we don't know, and certainly I will not cover everything. So what I will do is to present some research that is related to compassion and empathy. So sort of the first question, talking about biology and compassion, so where is the site of compassion? Where do we find compassion in ourselves? Is it the brain? Or is it maybe the heart? Or maybe elsewhere? Is it in the gut? We all have gut feelings sometimes, haven't we? So there is still a lot of sort of the connections within the whole body, within the whole system, and that is also related to our ability to feel compassion towards each other. But since I'm working with neuroimaging, I will focus the talk on the brain today. And I will start a little bit with emotional systems in the brain. So we could say that there are three main emotional systems that could be of interest here. We have sort of systems that is related to our ability of flight or fly. So when we feel threat from somewhere, we need to protect ourselves. And this system in the brain is very useful and has been very useful for our evolution. We have other systems related to wanting, to our motivation, and which is sensitive to reward. And so these are sort of other systems in the brain working with these capacities, so to say. But we have also the connecting part of the brain, which has evolved in humans and which is very, very important for the evolution of the human mind and the human society. So the connecting part is sort of soothing, caring, is responsible for altruistic behavior. And we could say that sort of the first two is related to the old brain, which is, from a developmental view, is sort of developed first. So this is sort of emotional behavior that is really necessary for our survival. And we could say that the other is the new brain, which is as necessary how we create societies today, because without the ability to connect to each other, we couldn't have grown societies. So I will continue with a little bit of images of the brain. So we have one part of the brain which is very much related to emotion, which is the amygdala, which is the almond-shaped site in the brain. And this is related to the fight and flight system. We have also something that sometimes is called the reward system. So there are, well, I will not go into details, but there are other parts of the brain that is connected with specific neurotransmitters that is sort of in this wanting part of the brain. And coming to what I will talk most about, we could call the social brain, which is very, very complex. And this is sort of a cartoon image of the brain, and you could see that there are different kinds of colors here representing different kinds of behavior. So we have, as you could see, we have the amygdala, we have the motivation reward system, but we also have systems for mentalizing, that is the more thinking part of compassion. You could say that is related to how we think about others, how we could imagine other people, what they are doing, and so on. And we also have the mirror system in the brain, which is related to that there are certain neuronal pathways that is activating when we are interacting with other people's. I will come back to that a little bit later. And we also have certain systems related to empathy and so on. And this, we could say, all these, you could see covering all aspects of brain function is related to the connecting brain, how we connect to each other. And so talking about the social brain, there is lots of factors, and I will mention just a few, which has been often discussed also in sort of more popular media. So one factor is the oxytocin, you maybe heard about that, which is very much important for pregnancy and for lactation. And it's also very, so it's a substance that is sort of synthesized in the brain and works on brain function. And it's important for human caregiving and also social behaviors. So I will give one example from brain imaging research. And so throughout this talk, I will sort of show you some examples from research results, and you're very welcome to ask questions if there's something sort of that I don't explain clearly. So when doing functional magnetic resonance imaging research, as I do, we have people, healthy people, we have patients, or whatever sort of group we want to study. They come into the scanner and they have to do different tasks. And related to emotional research is often pictures, so emotionally related pictures or sounds, for instance. So this first research is about sort of the influence of oxytocin in the brain. So the participants, they had listened to sounds of babies crying, and so they did that sort of during scanning, and then they also did the same task while they had oxytocin puffed into the noses, so they have an increased oxytocin level, you could say. And what was happening was that the oxytocin, it reduced the response in the amygdala. So it reduced the responses that is related to threat. And it also increased the responses in the insula, which is a region. The insula is island. It's a region inside here, folded inside the brain. And this area of the brain is related to interoception, among other things. So we could see here typical images, and I would, sorry, I don't have a pointer here, but on the top row, you could see the sort of the yellow spots inside the grayish structure, which is the amygdala. And you can see in the bar graph, so giving the participants oxytocin, it completely reduced the activation in the amygdala. And it also increased the activation in the insula, not only in the anterior part, but mostly in the anterior part of the insula. So another example about sort of the social brain, there are different kinds of neurons constructing our brain, of course. There's one special group of neurons that is called von Economer neurons, which is the person on the image. It's a special kind of neurons that sometimes is called spindle neurons. And what is special with this special kind of neuron group is that they occur in humans, in great apes, in whales, dolphins, and elephants, but not so much in other species. So it's thought that these kind of neurons build up what we call humanity, or the social behavior that we also could see in elephants and whales, for instance. And it's also seen that these kind of neurons, they have higher density in certain areas of the brain. So we come to we're talking about the salience network. And you could see, which is in this image, it is certain areas of the brain that react to any kind of salient event. So it could be sensory, auditory, it could be any kind of feelings coming up. And we're coming back to this area, which is the anterior insular cortex. And it's thought that this area is a representation of awareness, or we could say the feeling self. So when you have some sort of experience, it might start with a feeling, just a sense that something is happening. And from this area, it could set up projections to other parts of the brain. And then there's the other part that has high density of these special kinds of neurons, which is called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is more in the frontal middle part of the brain. And we could say this area has a lot of function, but you could say it's related to goal-directed behavior. So here we could see that there are certain areas that was created by evolution to make that we have the capacity of socializing, to connecting to each other. So going on to what I call loving kindness, empathy, and compassion, which are different kinds of sort of words, concept on a scale. So I will start with loving kindness, because that is something that is said it's most of a basal quality, a basal emotion, an emotion that you could sort of have at any time, whatever sort of circumstances we are in. And that was also something that came up in the talk yesterday. So sort of a basic emotion of loving kindness. And when something is happening, for instance, we see someone having a joyful time, we get sort of an emotional response. And that response is I mean, in a way, it's quite natural for us to do. So if we see someone that is happy, we enjoy with them. Or if we see someone that is sad, we also sort of feel the sadness. And that is sort of related to empathy. So the empathy is sort of the capacity to feel the feelings of others. But if something is sort of happening that, for instance, there is a possible threat, then sort of out of the loving kindness, the compassion arises. And the compassion is related to the willingness to alleviate suffering, the willingness to help other people. So that was sort of the background of that. Going on to what I briefly introduced is sort of the mirror neurons in the brain that help us sort of sense what other people sense. And this has been studied in several scientific studies. So I will just give one example of that from a research where people have studied sort of the brain activation related to touch. So you could imagine you have participants staying in the scanner while the images are taking, and they are touched by something. It could be a brush, it could be a human hand or whatever. And that evokes certain responses in the sensory areas of the brains. But what was interesting when it was discovered that if you're not sensing yourself, but you are looking at images or videos recorders of others being touched, you activate exactly the same areas. Not exactly, but there is an overlap of brain activation when you're from the situation when you're self being touched or when you see other people being touched. So this is how it. So the red areas is sort of when yourself are being touched, and the bluish areas is when you look at other people being touched, and the white is sort of the overlap between them. So this is a very important sort of human quality that we have that make it gives us the ability to feel, to sense what other people sense. So going on with empathy, which is more sort of going from sensing more to feeling, more to the emotional part of our experience, of feeling what other people feel. And doing research, we are sometimes quite strict, sometimes quite dry, because we need to define everything and we need to have sort of a definition so we have a common language, what we are talking about. So according to one definition that is quite often used, so what is empathy? You could say that empathy is when you are in an affective state, that you have some certain of emotions going on, and that this state is like another person's affective state. So you have some emotions that are like or similar to the emotions of other people. And you know that this state is sort of elicited by the sort of observation. You have to be in contact with the other people. So or imagination of the other people. And what is important is that you know that the other person is the source of your own affective state. So that's sort of empathy, because it's quite common, and you could see that in children, for instance, that if one child is crying, the other child is also crying, but that's not really empathy, because that other child maybe not know that he or she is crying because of the other child is crying. So that's a sort of an aspect of empathy, which is the more cognitive part of it, that you also know that what is the source of what you're feeling. So, going to some other examples from research. We could go to empathy of pain. And so in this special experiments we had, there were people seeing pictures of people in pain, different kind of physical pains, situations, and compared to looking at pictures of people in quite neutral situations. And interestingly, this evoked responses in areas that is very much related to the salience network that I described before. So we had activation in the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insular cortex. And this activation is very much correlated to the subjective sort of experience of pain. So during the experiment, they were asked to rate their own sort of pain, subjective feelings of pain. So another area is with sort of related to negative emotion is disgust. And here the participants were smelling disgusting odorants in the scanner. So that's I mean, you could do any kind of experiment with touch and smells and whatever. And compared to when the people were seeing pictures of others smelling disgusting odorants, and you know that if you smell something disgusting, you make funny or very specific mimics. And again, basically the same network is activated. Here we have more activation in the insular cortex, and I think that that's related to that the anterior insular cortex also have projection from the olfactory system, the smelling system. So again, coming back to the salience network, which is the sort of the anterior insular cortex, as I said, it's a representation of awareness and the feeling self. And we have the anterior cingulate cortex, which is related to goal-directed behavior. And these areas have high density of von Economo neurons, and at least the anterior insula is also sensitive to oxytocin. So this is what is sort of an overview, what is known about what empathy is and how that is expressed in our neurobiological selves, per se. So then coming to compassion, and what is compassion and what is the difference between empathy and compassion? So compassion is related with a wanting to alleviate suffering. So it is a sort of an agency, it's an acting component in compassion. And there are also, here again, we have sort of certain definitions. Sort of compassion is a feeling of concern for another person's suffering, which is accompanied with a motivation to help. And also that compassion is an essential human quality that allows one to feel, understand, and respond to the suffering of others. So there is an active component in compassion. So again, one example about research on compassionate attitude. And here the participants were instructed to sort of evoke compassion in themselves. And in the first phase, they were sort of viewing sad faces with a passive attitude, so not caring, not trying to care, just viewing. And as the other condition of the experiments, they were instructed to view sad faces with a compassionate attitude, with the attitude of wanting to help these people that have sort of suffering, that are suffering, that are sad. And here I could see, I don't know if you can see, but sort of that's the main issue with imaging, or to look at the images for. Okay, so we have activation in the empathy-related areas of the brain. But here we could also see something else, that we have activation in the more deeper parts of the brain that is related to motivation and reward, that comes with compassion. So this is one of many studies that have seen the connection between compassion and preparing for action. So we see that we have activation in brain areas which is related to motivation, but also to reward. I mean, as we talked about yesterday, for those who was here, that sort of helping other people also evoke positive feelings in ourselves. So it's some kind of a mutual reward in that action of helping. But we could also see that these areas are also involved in quite simple motor planning, sort of planning for moving your body, planning to do something. And what I also thought was interesting, that lesions in this area could lead to sort of motor deficits or apathy, for instance. So here we have the relation with sort of the feeling of empathy to feel sort of what other people are feeling, but also with this motivation to help, and that these brain activation are very much related to our development as human beings. So knowing this, and we could ask the question, is this a capacity that we could train? Could we be more compassionate to each other? And I will give some examples. I will give one example first from our own research, and I think that was maybe the reason why I got invited here. A few years ago, we had a student that wanted to do a project on meditation. And he knew a woman that has been trained in Tibetan Buddhism for many, many, many years. She was very experienced, and we wanted to see the brain activation during meditation. And what we asked her to do, to have some sort of a more controlled situation, we wanted her to meditate on a mantra. And what we thought that this meditation should evoke more activation in attention-related areas, because we thought that she was focusing her attention on the mantra. And when looking at the results, we were very, very confused because we couldn't see any relation to attention in that result. And then when we got back to this woman and asked her actually, what were you doing in the scanner? And she said, well, this mantra evoked a lot of compassionate feeling in me. And then by a sudden we understood the results. So what she did was clear to us, because this task, that what she was doing in the scanner, which is very much related to brain activation, which is related to empathy and also to compassion. So, so this was the first study, and it was sort of hidden somewhere in some libraries or whatever. But then, by sudden, this topic has been a great interest, and now there are lots of studies that try to find out that is this something that this woman had trained to become more compassionate, or is it that she was already from the beginning a very compassionate person, and that was why she chose to continue with the Buddhism? And so that's still something that is going on. So what is sort of inherent in us from the beginning, or what is sort of possible to develop during life. So again, an example of what could happen if you train people in certain aspects. And here is a study that wanted to delineate the differences between empathy and compassion. And there were two phases of this study, you could say. So there was a group of persons that were trained in empathy. So they were trained to look at images, look at videos, and sort of trained to really feel the emotions, feel the suffering of the people that were on the images and the movies. So that was the first phase. And the second phase, they were trained in compassion. So not only this feeling part, but also trained in sort of evoking this helping aspect, this wanting to alleviate the suffering. So during the scanner, they were viewing sort of highly emotional videos. And as in research, we always need to have a control group, because sort of if you're doing scanning several times, the brain activation could change just because you're being accustomed to be in the scanner, that you have done this task before and so on. So there was also a group that also had sort of an intervention, but the intervention was pure memory training. So what they could see, what I think was very interesting, is that the empathy training increased the negative affect. So when they were sort of training, really feeling the suffering of these people, they also felt more negative. They also felt more sad or distressed. But what happened when they had the compassion training, and this was very short training, I don't remember for a long time, but it was a sort of a study group. It's not people that have trained for years. It's rather weeks. And we could see that the compassion training reversed this increased negative effect. So that after the compassion training, they felt less negative emotional when doing the same task. But what also was interesting is that they also increased the positive effect. So it could say that this person also could feel sort of in that feeling of wanting to help alleviate the suffering, they also were feeling more positive emotion in that. So here was the one of the results. And so the blue areas are areas that were activated when they were trained in empathy. And the red areas that were activated when they were trained in compassion. And without going into details, we could see that these areas were not overlapping. So we have, as in the previous research, we have the activation mostly in the salence network, the anterior insula, the anterior cingulate cortex for empathy. But for compassion, we have also, but other parts of the cingulate cortex, more basal parts, and also sort of in the midbrain, in these areas that are related to motivation and also to reward and motor action. So just sort of finishing up before giving the word giving up open for questions, of course, but also giving the word to the next speaker. So how can we do this? How can we sort of train ourselves in compassion? And I will just give one example that has been sort of, I think most of the methods that has been developed has sort of come from this idea of the loving kindness, sort of to develop basic emotions of loving kindness towards oneself and towards others. And sort of grounded in that basic, so to say, positive emotion when we meet people in suffering, that we could say, sort of from that sort of bath of loving kindness, we could say that compassion arises quite naturally. And I will finish up with a sort of a citation that might be helpful, that sort of by practicing loving kindness meditation or other forms of compassion training, we could say that this is empowering the practitioners with the understanding that both empathy and compassion are traits that can be cultivated, so that we all have the possibility to cultivate compassion. So, yeah, thank you for listening.
Questions before the break? Do you have a roving microphone?
Underneath it.
Where would you say the microphone?
Here we are.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. I've been a nurse for 35 years, but that doesn't mean to say I know anything. I completely relate to the role of empathy and compassion in any place. And I would say that I've often learned the most from people who couldn't see, couldn't walk, otherwise gifted people with challenges of all sorts. But I'm also curious to see how your modality could be used as an effective model of helping people who've been brainwashed for cruelty, child soldiers, people recovering from traumatic events and PTSD, and also I've been a psychiatric nurse as well. Could you give us some practical solutions for maybe helping refugees as well? And people who've been trained, even from a young age, to be sensitised to violence.
Yeah, since I'm not involved with sort of the therapy
Yes.
of sort of how to train, but I'm quite, from a personal point of view, I am certain that sort of learning to be, if you are a sort of a victim to violence or sort of traumas in different kind, learning to be firstly more compassionate for yourself, feeling more sort of love and understanding for your own situation, but also trying to bridge out, sort of say to, I could imagine that these people also could feel a lot of hate towards the people that have in some way caused them the suffering. But if there is a sort of this kind of therapy, sort of cultivating loving kindness, cultivating compassion, will also diminish the hate, and that by itself, diminishing the hate, will create more well-being for themselves.
And just as an aside, this reminds me a lot, and I won't hold the microphone, I promise, but just that the modality has to be a multidisciplinary approach. We often use a group of artists to increase choices in this, and it's used in prisons and other places where I haven't worked in a prison, but something similar to it. And immediate measurements and reduction of pain and increase in oxygenation content, and or even just the power to say no through the arts as well. So I think the arts have a direct link to compassion, how to teach compassion and relate to others. Anyway, please, it's someone else's turn now.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it's really important.
It's all out there, so just make whatever you do public for people so they can learn. Right? Who next?
One in the middle.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for such an interesting explanation and very clear. I'm interested to know whether your research went far enough to discover what impact the compassion training had. So when people had developed their compassionate responses, was there any research to show what practical action emanated from that? Given that you said that compassion, the definition is that it leads to practical action, and whether there was a comparison between the control group and the group who had the training.
Yeah, I think that's really essential. I mean, we could show that you have sort of changes, momentarily changes, or changes sort of in brain activation after longer or shorter training. But what is important is sort of the subsequent action and the behavior. And I think there are studies going on there. I think I'm not really sort of acquainted in details because I'm basically coming from an imaging point of view, but I think it's really necessary to do these studies. Haven't been done so much of a sort of these follow-up studies, sort of what is happening. Are you sort of this training, rewinding the brain, and that have sort of consequences in the long run, and how does that work? There is some studies, of course, that have done that, but and I know that there are ongoing studies on looking at the long-term effects, which is actually very important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, thank you. For the lecture. I've got two questions really. I hope they're not too long. One is, I've read somewhere in something like New Scientist that it's possible to image a part of the brain that is related to whether you have religious feelings, I suppose, religious emotions. And I wonder if you have any insight into that at all. And the other one is about burnout, because you talked about compassion, but I'm actually a retired health worker, but I'm very aware of the phenomenon of burnout in people who are working with people for whom one has a lot of compassion but then loses it, and I wonder if you've any experience of how if that can be alleged at all.
Yeah, I mean, starting with the last question, it's regarding, I mean, almost anything you could sort of set up an experiment, but sort of you have to be aware also about the limitations, what you are sort of seeing. But of course it's coming more and more that we could use imaging to follow up what is happening to people and what is happening, what is the response to different therapies. I'm not familiar with the literature on burnout myself. Regarding the first question, it's quite interesting. I know that there is a lot of research going on, so to see is there sort of a religious site in the brain. The example that I know a little bit about, because there is one of my colleagues that I've been working with for several years. She is a neurologist, so she is sort of the medical doctor for people with epilepsy. And some people with epilepsy have religious experiences, and even though they are not considering themselves religious. So she has, she's an Anne-Marie Landblom, and she's taking great interest in that, sort of looking into the brain, what is creating these experiences. She's living in Vadstena, where the only Swedish saint were living. So I think that's the background, and it was thought that she also had epilepsy, and that has been discussed if that sort of epilepsy caused her religious experiences. And what I know is that some patients with epilepsy with lesions in the anterior insula, which I talked about, related to the empathy and the feeling and the interoception, they can have sort of these religious experiences, and that's sort of a feeling of wholeness, feeling of something holding them, feeling of connectedness, so to say, so that they can have that during their sort of epilepsy attacks. So that is what I know about that.
Thank you.
Yes, there's some work being done at Cambridge. Is it Cole? Alistair Cole at Cambridge, and there's a little clip on the website where he asked the question, is there a God centre in the brain? If you give me your details later, I can find the link. But he proposed too many clips asking.
I wondered if there was an overlap, you see, between there probably maybe what was there.
Alistair Cole at Cambridge.
This is a rather basic question, simple-minded. What exactly is it that the scanner is detecting in these images? What exactly is it that the scanner is detecting in these images? Is it changes in electrical activity? Because presumably the whole brain is throbbing with electrical activity all done. Why does it image a particular area?
Yeah, it is. So in the MRI, we are detecting sort of neural responses to certain stimuli, but indirectly. So we are detecting it through the influence of neural signaling on the blood flow. So it is in this way, it is an indirect measurement, but knowing from other studies, we know that there is a sort of this relation between neural activity and the blood flow. And so that is what is happening is that we have in the blood that is sort of transporting both glucose but also oxygen to the brain tissue, and that is transported by the hemoglobin, and when the hemoglobin is sort of leaving the oxygen to the tissue, it becomes like a contrast agent. So it becomes like an internal contrast agent. And what is quite interesting is that this is occurring very locally in the brain. So that's why we could see that it's not all over the brain. It is in certain places in the brain that this occurs.
Well, yes.
A strange experience. I had a profound, quite a brain injury about 10 years ago. I couldn't finish sentences, exceptionally emotionally labile and various, seriously life disrupting. I took up meditation from a sort of Buddhist tradition without adopting the religion. And one of the things I found was that it helped me dramatically when I came across what we call metta-bhavana, or loving kindness meditation, not mantra-based. And it basically helps you accept where you are is where you are in your rehabilitation. And one of the things I also noticed was that you could say my amygdala, my fight-flight response was exceptionally triggered by this brain injury. And I tended to find, although I've still got a degree of trigger, I tended to find that by using loving kindness, compassionate type of meditation, that I'm able to actually bring people into my meditation who have got a facility to trigger certain aspects of my amygdala, for want of a better model. So I think you'll find there's a lot of work starting to go into the proper loving kindness meditation. It can take up to about an hour, and it's highly, highly effective, because you can actually live with people that drive you bonkers, basically. If you bring them into your fourth stage of meditation.
Yeah.
Including yourself, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think it's, I have the experience myself, so I know for certain that it works.
Thanks very much for your talk. I enjoyed it very much. And just to follow up a bit on the question about religious experience, are you aware of any studies that have been done looking at more explicit religious behaviours, like prayer, for example, and how they might affect the symptoms described? I'm thinking, for example, might you expect them to light up not only the raw-based circuitry, the empathy circuitry, but the social connectedness as well? Because I sometimes think prayer is often about connecting one another, not just about sending out messages to God or whatever. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I know, I can't give any direct references now, but I know that there's been studies on also this kind of religious experience, and also sort of prayer, and I, as I remember, it has basically the same effects as more mindfulness training. But if I remember right, the prayer evokes more activation in cognitive related areas. Hope I'm not remembering wrong now, but it was sometime I read these papers.
I can project my voice. Does everybody hear me okay?
Can you hear me? I have the microphone.
Oh, we'll just take Raphael and then we'll take your point.
Oh.
Thank you. Earlier in your talk,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you mentioned loving kindness.
Okay.
And the way that loving kindness when people were looking at photographs of different states, emotions. At that time I thought, well, is that sense of loving kindness activated in the same areas with, like, an artist or someone in nature feeling loving kindness towards nature or to the planet or to a flower? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, interesting question. I would imagine that it is sort of the basic quality of love and connectedness that you could feel towards just being in the nature, or just, I mean, that has been sort of witnessed and also by my own experience, that sometimes sort of the same kind of emotions could be evoked by looking at art, for instance. Or
as a previous commentator mentioned, the effectiveness of art with people who have problems.
I think through art we could come more in contact with our own positive emotions.
Of course, traditionally, this is called enlightenment.
This is called
enlightenment.
Okay, yeah.
For all those who are enlightened, everything enlightens them.
Yeah, but I think, yes, so in this sort of concept, taking different sensory inputs, sort of both by sort of doing art, being in the nature, I think everything is helping us to be more positive.
Take one more mic.
I'm sorry to be the second timer, but I just wanted to, Professor, I wanted to understand your conversation about hemoglobin and its as an internal compressed agent. Would that mean, or did I misunderstand what you were saying? Would that mean that areas of the brain that are better oxygenated would be better stimulated and better more functioning?
Oh, interesting, yeah.
Did you mean that, or did I just...
I didn't mean that, but
I
think yeah, I didn't say that, Joyce. But I think it's that could be a relation. It could. There is a relation between sort of cerebral blood flow and sort of perfusion in the brain tissue and brain function.
Right.
So I mean, the more everything is more well functioning, also the neural system is functioning better.
Yeah. Because it actually was measurable in Georgetown University Hospital, where I was an artist on the ICU. I'm not a therapist, but we were like troubadours, and we'd there'd be violinists and movement therapy people and dancers, and the nurses would come in and say, "Good Lord, goodness, what happened to this patient? They couldn't. The measurements of everything had really improved, and we hadn't tried to do anything consciously. It was as if they just dissolved and stepped out of their pain for a second, and I don't know, it was pretty amazing. Yeah. Anyway, someone else. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to break for refreshments now. There'll be a 30-minute break. I'd like to thank you all for your contributions in the first part of this session. It's been really, really, really good. And thanks, Maria, for the presentation.
Thank you.